Have you ever been left out of something that you thought you were supposed to be part of? What do you do when your own family decides you don't matter enough to be included? Sarah had been staring at her phone screen for what felt like an eternity. The email notification, marked as urgent, sat innocently on her screen. It was from her cousin, Emily, with the subject, "Family reunion this weekend. We miss you." She clicked it with a sigh, hoping for a message along the lines of, "Oops, we made a mistake. We can't wait to see you at the reunion." But instead, the email was a detailed itinerary of the weekend event, dates, times, locations, all without her name included. No mention of her. No apology. Just a simple, matter-of-fact notice that the family reunion was taking place and she wasn't invited. Sarah's heart sank as she read the lines over and over, her mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. Was this a mistake? Had someone accidentally left her off the list? She scrolled through the email one more time, scanning for any mention of her name or an explanation. But no, it was a silent exclusion. The hurt was sharp, like a knife to her chest. She had always been there for her family, supporting them when they needed help, sacrificing her own time and comfort for others. And now it felt as if she had been erased from their lives. The one place where she'd always felt like she belonged was now a place where she wasn't even wanted. Her fingers trembled as she dialed her brother Mark's number. Mark, her older brother, had always been her closest confidant. They had shared everything, family secrets, personal struggles, dreams of the future. If anyone could explain this, it would be him. But when the call went straight to voicemail, her heart dropped even further. "Mark," she said softly to the empty phone, "what's going on? Why wasn't I invited to the reunion?" She paused, feeling the weight of the questions settle in her chest. But there was no answer. No one was answering her calls, her messages. Not even her parents. It felt like she had disappeared from their world without anyone noticing. After a few minutes, she put the phone down, staring blankly at the screen. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. She thought about the countless family gatherings they had shared over the years, the laughter, the inside jokes, the shared memories that bonded them together. How could they have left her out of this one? As she sat there, the doorbell rang. Startled, Sarah quickly stood up and walked toward the front door. She opened it to find her cousin Jill standing on the other side, looking a bit too cheery for someone who didn't know what had just happened. "Hey, Sarah. How's everything? I was thinking of stopping by and catching up before the big weekend." Jill's words were filled with enthusiasm, but Sarah could barely muster a smile in return. "Actually, Jill, can we talk?" she asked, her voice strained. "I just got an email about the family reunion. Did you know I wasn't invited?" Her voice wavered, trying not to show how deeply this had hurt her. Jill's face fell, the smile slipping from her lips as she shifted uncomfortably on her feet. "Sarah, I'm sorry you weren't included. But honestly, it wasn't personal. You know how Mom and Dad are. They probably thought you were too busy with work to come." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Busy? Jill, I've never missed a family reunion. I've always been there for them, and they just left me out this time, without even telling me why." Jill looked away, her eyes darting nervously. "I really don't know the details. But, maybe it's a good thing you didn't come. You know how tense things have been between everyone. It might be awkward." Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The words stung. Awkward. Was she the cause of that tension? Was that why they had kept her away? She couldn't help but feel like a stranger in her own family now. "Thanks for the heads up, Jill," Sarah said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think I need some time to process this. Maybe I'll just skip the reunion altogether." Jill nodded awkwardly, backing away from the door. "I get it. Just know that we all love you, okay? And if you want to talk, I'm here." As Jill left, Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the empty space where her cousin had been just moments before. She could hear the waves crashing against the shore outside, loud, constant, relentless. The sound of the ocean should have been comforting, but it only reminded her of how isolated she felt. Her beach house, the place she had once called a sanctuary, felt more like a prison now. She couldn't even remember the last time she had truly felt at peace here. Her mind went back to the email. Her cousin had mentioned that the reunion was happening this weekend at a beach house, her beach house. But why wasn't she invited to the family event she had always been a part of? Her own family seemed to be turning their backs on her, just when she needed them most. But then something unexpected happened. A new email arrived. This one was from Mark. "Hey Sarah, I know things are awkward right now, and I can't explain everything. But I was wondering if you'd be willing to let us come stay at your beach house for a few days. We've been dealing with a lot of stuff, and we all miss you. Can you give us a chance to make it up to you? Love, Mark." Sarah's fingers hovered over her phone, uncertain of what to do. She was furious. She was hurt. But a small part of her still wanted to believe that her family could fix things. Her emotions were a tangled mess. On one hand, she wanted to scream at them for excluding her. On the other, she felt a flicker of hope. Was this their way of trying to make amends? Or was it just another manipulation? But before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Jill. "Please, Sarah. They really want to make it right. You're the glue that holds us all together. Don't shut us out completely." Sarah's mind raced. She had been hurt, betrayed. But was she really willing to let go of everything they had shared just because of a mistake? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough, she thought, as she stared out at the horizon, unsure of the answer herself. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, absently stirring her coffee as her thoughts swirled around her like the dark liquid in her mug. Her phone sat next to her, still with the unread email from Mark flashing on the screen. She hadn't responded yet. Part of her was still hoping that if she ignored it long enough, maybe everything would go back to normal, that the pain of exclusion would just fade. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. Sarah had always been the one who put family first. Growing up, her role in the family was clear. She was the caregiver, the peacemaker, the one who held things together when everything else seemed to fall apart. She was the first to pick up the phone when someone needed advice, the first to volunteer for family events, and the first to give up her own plans to make sure others were okay. That's just who she was. Her mother, Claire, had always been the nurturing figure in the family. She was warm, kind, and endlessly patient, always making sure everyone's needs were met, often at the expense of her own. But as Sarah grew older, she started to see the cracks in that picture. Her mother, while loving, often deferred to her father, Richard, a man who commanded the room with his strong presence and opinions. Richard was the type of person who believed in order and tradition, in doing things the right way, whatever that meant. It was Richard who had always been the loudest voice in the family, the one who made decisions without ever consulting anyone else. And it was Richard who, over time, began to slowly take control of every aspect of family life. Sarah's mother, Claire, while loving, had become passive, often deferring to her husband's demands. Sarah could see how it affected her mother, but she didn't know how to help her. And then there was Mark, her older brother, her protector, her ally. Or so she thought. Mark was a complicated figure. He had always been Sarah's best friend growing up, the one who understood her better than anyone else. He was the one who stayed up late with her during her teenage years, discussing their hopes, dreams, and fears. But when he left for college, things started to change. He came back less often, less available, more absorbed in his own life and career. It wasn't that he didn't care about her, but somewhere along the way, he had become less attentive, less present. As time went on, Sarah tried to be understanding. She knew Mark had his own challenges to face, his career, his marriage to Olivia, the pressure to be successful in the eyes of their father. But as Sarah's own life became more complex, with her own struggles and needs, it started to feel as though she was the only one holding onto the family. The only one trying to keep everything together. She hadn't always been the strong one. She remembered a time before she felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. A time when she could laugh freely with her cousins, when she didn't worry about being the problem solver for everyone else. It was when she was younger, before her parents' marriage became more strained, before Mark became distant, before she was forced to grow up too quickly. As the years passed, Sarah began to feel like she was stuck in an unspoken role that no one had ever asked her to play. She was the caretaker, the mediator, the one who made sure everyone was happy, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. And somewhere along the way, she lost herself. The cheerful, free-spirited girl who used to dance around in her room with no cares in the world had disappeared. In her place stood a woman who was always putting out fires, trying to fix relationships that weren't hers to fix, trying to make everyone happy at the expense of her own joy. That's why the exclusion from the family reunion stung so deeply. It wasn't just about missing a weekend getaway. It was about feeling like she no longer mattered to them. Like all her efforts to hold the family together had been in vain. She had been the one who always kept in touch, who always made sure everyone was okay, who hosted the family events when no one else would. And now, they had left her out. She could feel the familiar ache of being invisible once again, like the world was moving forward without her. But as the waves crashed against the shore outside her window, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this was a turning point. Maybe this was the moment when everything could change. She didn't have to keep carrying the weight of her family's problems alone. She didn't have to be the one who held everything together if no one else cared to hold her up in return. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that this might be her chance to finally let go of the role she had been playing for so long. She didn't have to keep being the glue for a family that wasn't willing to put in the effort to stick together. But how could she walk away from them now? How could she separate herself from the people she had loved for so long? She thought of her father, Richard, and the way he had always expected her to sacrifice for the greater good of the family. He had always assumed that Sarah would be there when they needed her. But this time, he had crossed a line. They had crossed a line. She wasn't going to let herself be taken for granted any longer. The thought of confronting her father, of telling him how much his constant control and disregard for her needs had hurt her, filled her with both fear and determination. She had always been afraid to speak up to him, afraid of his disappointment, of the silence that followed his disapproving stares. But now, something had shifted inside her. She was tired of being the quiet one, tired of being the one who always took the back seat. If they wanted to fix things, they had to acknowledge her needs, her pain. Her thoughts were interrupted by a buzzing sound. It was her phone again, another message from Mark. "Sarah, please. I know I messed up. I didn't stand up for you, and I should have. I'm sorry. We really need to talk." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt something stir inside her. It wasn't just anger or hurt. It was something else. A flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something different. Maybe her family could change. But as she looked out at the ocean, she couldn't help but wonder, was she willing to risk everything again? The days that followed were a blur of mixed emotions for Sarah. She couldn't stop thinking about the reunion and the invitation, or, rather, the lack of one. Despite the warm weather and the inviting scent of the ocean breeze, she felt nothing but cold inside her beach house. The one place she used to love to retreat to now felt like a fortress, an empty, echoing reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Sarah had thought about the message from Mark all night. "We really need to talk." His words rang in her ears, but she didn't know what to say. What could she say after everything that had happened? The reunion was drawing closer, and despite her best efforts to focus on work, her thoughts kept drifting back to the family that had, quite frankly, let her down. Her phone sat beside her on the kitchen counter, taunting her with the unread messages from her brother and cousin, and yet she couldn't bring herself to respond. The truth was, Sarah was hurt. More than that, she was confused. How could Mark, her brother, her closest confidant, let her be shut out like this? She had always believed that family came first. But now it seemed as if they had forgotten her entirely. It wasn't until Thursday evening, 2 days before the reunion, that Sarah decided to confront the situation head-on. Her anger had simmered long enough, and though the thought of facing her family again terrified her, she knew she couldn't keep avoiding it. She needed answers. She dialed Mark's number again. This time, he picked up almost immediately. "Sarah." His voice sounded almost too relieved, as if he had been waiting for this call. "Hey, I'm glad you called. I know things have been weird, and I owe you an apology." Sarah could feel the walls around her heart begin to crack. Mark's tone was soft, sincere, nothing like the defensive, dismissive attitude he'd had over the past few months. Maybe this could be the breakthrough, she thought. "Mark, what's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly despite her attempts to stay composed. "I don't understand why I wasn't invited to the reunion. What's going on with the family? Why does it feel like no one even cares anymore?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Mark spoke again. "Sarah, I can't explain everything. There's a lot of tension, and I'm not sure how it got this far. You know how Dad is. He's been really, well, difficult. I guess it's easier for him to just avoid things than deal with them head-on." "Easier for him to avoid things?" Sarah repeated, incredulous. "What about me, Mark? What about how I feel? Why didn't anyone think to ask me? I've always been there for everyone, and now I'm invisible." Mark sighed, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I know, and you're right to feel that way. But I think you've got to understand, things between Dad and me, they've been strained. There's been a lot of pressure from him, a lot of expectations. He's always wanted us to be perfect, his perfect kids, his perfect family. But the truth is, I can't keep up with that anymore. I feel like I've been living in his shadow for too long." Sarah was stunned. She had always assumed Mark was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in their father's eyes. Hearing him speak with such raw honesty about his struggles was both a relief and a wake-up call. But it didn't make her feel any better about the situation. "I get it, Mark," she said, her voice softening. "But that doesn't explain why I was left out of everything. I've been trying to hold the family together for so long, and now it feels like I'm the one being punished for it. If I'm not a part of this reunion, what does that mean? Do I even matter to you guys anymore?" "I don't know," Mark said quietly. "I can't speak for everyone else, but I know you matter to me. And I don't want to lose that, Sarah. I know I've been distant. I've been so focused on my own life and trying to make Dad proud that I didn't stop to think about how all of this was affecting you." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to breathe through the growing lump in her throat. Mark's words were the closest thing to an apology she had heard in years, but they didn't erase the hurt. "It's not just about the reunion, Mark. It's everything. I've been putting everyone else first for so long, and no one ever asks me what I need. No one ever cares about my life." Another long silence stretched between them. Mark's voice, when it came, was quieter, almost hesitant. "What do you need, Sarah? Tell me what you need, and I'll do everything I can to fix it." There was a strange shift in the air as Sarah considered his words. She wanted to say so much, to tell him everything, to let him know how deeply she had been hurt, how suffocating it had become to constantly put everyone else's needs before her own. But the words wouldn't come. It felt too raw, too vulnerable. Instead, she found herself doing the one thing she had always done, putting the other person's needs before her own. I need time to figure things out. I don't know what I want right now, Mark. I'm just so tired of trying to keep everything together when no one is willing to do the same. The line went silent again, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was quiet, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding. Finally, Mark spoke. I get it. And I'll respect whatever you need. Just know that I'm here for you, okay? I'll always be here. Thanks, Mark, Sarah whispered, the tightness in her chest loosening just slightly. I'll think about it. As she ended the call, she let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The conversation had been difficult, but it had also given her a sense of clarity she hadn't had before. She wasn't alone in her pain. Mark had his own struggles, his own reasons for the distance between them. But that didn't mean she had to accept the way things had been. And yet, as much as she wanted to move on, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease in the pit of her stomach. There was more to this situation than just Mark's struggles. There was something deeper, something unspoken, that was pulling them all apart. The reunion was still looming, and Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to face her family again. But the time had come for her to stop being the strong one and start figuring out what she needed. The weekend of the family reunion arrived like a storm cloud on the horizon, and Sarah still wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. She had spent the past few days in a haze of uncertainty, torn between wanting to stay far away from her family and the nagging feeling that she couldn't keep running from them forever. The conflict inside her was growing stronger by the minute. On one hand, she wanted to protect herself, to distance herself from the people who had let her down, but on the other, she still loved them. She was still connected to them in a way that was hard to shake off. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, snapping her out of her thoughts. Another message from Mark. Please, Sarah, I know I screwed up, but we need to talk. The reunion's in 2 days. You can't avoid this forever. Let me know what you're thinking. She felt a surge of frustration. He didn't get it. They never got it. How could he ask her to just show up like everything was fine when nothing was fine? When her place in the family felt so fragile, so easily discarded. But deep down, she also knew that this wasn't just about the reunion anymore. It was about something bigger, about what kind of person she wanted to be moving forward. She needed to stop letting them dictate the terms of her life. But what would that look like? Could she really let go of the role she had played for so long, the role of the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who held everything together? The thought made her heart race. For so many years, it felt like the only thing she had been was family. But now she was standing on the edge of something different, something unknown. And the question was, could she let go of that identity and figure out who she was without it? It wasn't until late that evening, just before sunset, that she made a decision. The waves were calm, the sky bathed in hues of purple and orange as the sun began its slow descent into the horizon. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling inside her head. It was then that she realized she couldn't keep trying to live up to their expectations. She couldn't keep trying to fit into the mold they had cast for her. The phone rang again, and this time, Sarah didn't hesitate to pick it up. Mark, she said, her voice steady but firm. Sarah, Mark replied, his voice tinged with both relief and nervousness. Are you coming to the reunion? I've been talking to Dad and everyone else. They're all worried about you. The familiar lump of frustration rose in her throat. Worried? About me? Or worried about how it looks if I don't show up? How does that even matter at this point? There was a long silence before Mark answered, his voice softer now, more vulnerable. I know it's not just about the reunion. You're right. It's about everything. I screwed up. I should have been there for you, Sarah. I should have stood up to Dad and everyone else. I should have told them you were important. But I didn't. And now, I'm paying the price. We're paying the price. Sarah let out a breath, her grip tightening on the phone. I've always been there for all of you, Mark. I've always picked up the pieces when things fell apart. But I'm not sure I can keep doing that anymore. I'm not sure I even want to. What are you saying, Sarah? Mark asked, the question hanging in the air. She paused for a moment, staring out at the water, the uncertainty washing over her like a wave. I'm saying that I can't keep putting my life on hold for people who don't see me. I can't keep being the one who always tries to fix everything when no one ever notices that I'm breaking, too. There was a long silence before Mark spoke again. So, what now? I don't know, she whispered. But I need to figure it out. I'm not coming to the reunion. Not this time. I need space. I need to breathe. Maybe we can talk later, when I've had time to really think about all of this. Mark didn't protest. Instead, there was an understanding in his voice. Okay, I'll let you have your space. But just know I'm here. Whenever you're ready. I'm not going anywhere. Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat, trying to keep her emotions in check. Thanks, Mark. She hung up and sank into the couch, her mind racing. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest, but it also felt liberating. She didn't have to keep sacrificing herself to make everyone else happy. She could carve out her own path. But what did that look like? She had always been the glue in her family, the one who held everything together, the one who cleaned up after everyone else's messes. But now, for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she wanted to keep playing that role. The thought scared her. The idea of cutting ties, even temporarily, felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. But at the same time, it felt like the only way forward. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of her family's expectations. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself pacing back and forth. Her emotions swirled, conflicting with each other: anger, sadness, relief, fear. She could feel the familiar pull of her family's expectations, the guilt of choosing herself over them, but she also felt a spark of something else: freedom. Her mind flashed to the beach house, to the peaceful solitude that had once brought her comfort. Maybe it wasn't just a house. Maybe it was a symbol of the life she could have if she stopped clinging to the past. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to rebuild on her own terms. The next morning, Sarah stood at the edge of the beach, watching the sun rise over the horizon. The salty air filled her lungs, the waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of calm. She had made the right choice. She didn't need the reunion to feel whole. She didn't need to play the role she had been given. She just needed to figure out who she was without the weight of everyone else's expectations. And that, in itself, was enough. The following days were filled with uncertainty, but they also brought a quiet sense of peace. Sarah kept herself busy at the beach house, spending time by the water, walking along the shoreline, and doing things she hadn't allowed herself to enjoy in years. For the first time in a long time, she was taking care of herself, not worried about the demands of others. But the peace she had found was fragile, and she knew it wouldn't last forever. It was only a matter of time before her family reached out again. Saturday evening, just as Sarah was sitting down to a quiet dinner by herself, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from her mom. "We need to talk. Please call me when you get this." Her heart dropped into her stomach. She hadn't spoken to her mom since the reunion invitation fiasco, and the tension that had been building between them now felt unbearable. She stared at the message for a long time, considering whether she should call or just ignore it. The last thing she wanted was another confrontation, another conversation where she'd end up feeling guilty for wanting more than they had ever been willing to give her. But something inside of her told her that this was a conversation she couldn't avoid. Not this time. Taking a deep breath, she dialed her mother's number. "Hey, Mom," Sarah said, trying to sound calm, though she could feel her hands shaking as she held the phone. "I got your message. What's going on?" There was a long pause on the other end. When her mom spoke, her voice was low, and Sarah could hear the weight of emotion behind it. "Sarah, I'm sorry," her mother said, her voice breaking slightly. "I know you're angry. I know we've hurt you. And I want you to know that it was never my intention to shut you out." Sarah closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. Her mom's words were so much different from what she had expected. She had anticipated defensiveness, maybe even more excuses. But instead, there was genuine regret in her mother's voice. "Mom," Sarah started, her voice quiet. "I don't even know where to begin. It feels like you and Dad have been slowly pulling away from me for years. I've tried so hard to be there, to hold everything together, but it's like I don't even matter anymore." Her mom sighed heavily. "I know, sweetie. And I don't blame you for feeling that way. Your father and we've been so caught up in our own lives, in our own struggles, that we never even stopped to see how it was affecting you. You've always been the one who held things together for everyone else. And I see now that I didn't appreciate that enough. I see now how much you've been carrying, how much we've all depended on you." The weight of her mom's words sank deep into Sarah's chest, and for a moment, she was speechless. It was one thing to feel hurt and unseen. It was another thing entirely to hear her mother acknowledge it. But even as the words settled into her, the anger that had been simmering inside her for so long began to rise once more. The hurt was too deep to just let go, no matter how much her mom was apologizing now. "I've been carrying all of you for so long," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "And the thing is, when I needed you, when I needed my family to see me, to care about me, it was like I didn't even exist. I wasn't invited to the reunion, Mom. And that hurt more than I can put into words. Do you even realize how that feels?" Another long silence. Sarah could hear her mother's soft sobs on the other end, and it broke her heart all over again. "I had no idea it hurt you like that," her mother finally said, her voice full of remorse. "We were so caught up in our own world that we didn't see how we were pushing you away. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I can't change what's happened, but I can promise you that I'll do better. I'll make it right. I'll do whatever it takes to make you feel seen again." Sarah didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to say that it was too little, too late, that she couldn't just forget everything that had happened. But at the same time, she realized that this apology was the first real step her family had taken toward understanding her pain. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the years of feeling ignored and unloved, but it was something. "I need time, Mom," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can just forgive everything and go back to how things were. But I'll think about it. I need to figure out what I want, what I need from all of you." Her mother's voice was gentle. "I understand. Take all the time you need, honey. Just know that I love you, and I'm here for you, whenever you're ready." As Sarah hung up the phone, she sank back against the couch, her mind racing. The conversation with her mom had been a long time coming, but now that it was over, she didn't feel the sense of relief she had expected. Instead, there was a heaviness in her chest, a weight that had been lifted only to be replaced by another. Her family had acknowledged the pain they had caused her, but was that enough? Could she rebuild these fractured relationships, or was this just another false start, another round of promises that wouldn't be kept? And what about her own life? The path she was forging for herself, was it the right one? She had taken the first steps toward change, but she still wasn't sure what that change would look like. She wasn't sure who she was without her role as the family fixer, the one who always kept the peace. The one thing she knew for sure was this: she couldn't go back to being the person she was before. It was time to create something new, something better, something for her. The phone call with her mother lingered in Sarah's mind long after she had ended the conversation. The rawness of the apology, the admission of how much her family had taken her for granted, and the promise to do better, it all felt like both a weight and a glimmer of hope. But despite her mother's words, Sarah couldn't ignore the deeper questions still bubbling inside her. What did it mean to truly forgive? And, more importantly, what did it mean to move forward when so much had been left unresolved? She sat on the porch of the beach house, the ocean waves crashing rhythmically against the shore, as her thoughts swirled like the tides below. For years, Sarah had defined herself through her relationship with her family, her role as the peacekeeper, the one who made sure everything worked, even when it didn't. She had put so much energy into holding the pieces of their broken relationships together that she had lost track of what mattered most, herself. But now, for the first time in her life, Sarah was facing a question she'd never truly allowed herself to ask. What about me? What did she need to heal, to grow, and to become the person she had always dreamed of being, outside of the constant expectations of her family? The following weeks were a period of self-discovery, a time for Sarah to reflect on who she was when no one else was telling her who she should be. She found herself taking long walks along the beach, spending hours reading books she had never had the time to read, and even starting a journal where she poured out her thoughts and feelings about the future. The beach house, once just a place to escape, had now become her sanctuary. It was where she could be alone with her thoughts, free from the noise of family demands, where she could finally begin to heal. But as she delved deeper into this process of self-reflection, she realized that healing wasn't just about creating distance from her family. It was about finding the courage to reconnect with them on her own terms, when she was ready, if she was ready. She still wasn't sure whether reconciliation with her family was possible, but she had to admit that the thought of it didn't seem quite as impossible anymore. One day, as Sarah was sitting by the window of the beach house, sipping a cup of tea, she received a message that shook her to her core. It was from Mark. "I know you're still processing everything, but I just wanted to say I'm proud of you for choosing yourself. I don't know if I've told you enough, but I'm sorry for all the times I wasn't there when you needed me. If you ever want to talk about anything, I'm here. You matter, Sarah. More than you know." Tears welled up in her eyes as she read the message. She had always known that Mark cared, but hearing it, really hearing it, was a moment of clarity. It wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about growth. Her family wasn't perfect, and they had made mistakes, but this was the beginning of something different. It wasn't just about her healing, it was about the potential for all of them to heal together. For the first time, Sarah realized that she didn't need to sacrifice her own well-being to be a part of their family. She didn't need to take on the weight of everyone else's emotions, their struggles, their drama. She could choose to be a part of their lives on her own terms. And that was empowering. The following month, Sarah made the decision to visit her family. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still many unsaid things, and the air between them was thick with old wounds. But she was ready. She was ready to face them, not as the person who had always cleaned up their messes, but as someone who had found her voice and her strength. She was ready to walk into that reunion not with the weight of her family's expectations on her shoulders, but with the courage to define her place in the family on her own terms. The reunion took place at her parents' house. When Sarah walked in, there was a moment of stunned silence. Her father was the first to stand up, his face softening as he looked at her. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm so glad you came." She nodded, her eyes scanning the room. The rest of the family looked just as uncertain as she felt, but Sarah stood tall, feeling the weight of her decision to come, her decision to step into the space between them, not as the person who had always been the glue, but as someone who could finally ask for what she needed, too. As the evening unfolded, Sarah noticed a shift. There was no longer a sense of her being the outsider, the one who had to be the strong one while everyone else fell apart. Instead, there was a mutual understanding, a recognition that things had been broken, but they didn't have to stay that way. Conversations were softer, more real. People apologized, but more importantly, they listened. Her mother sat down beside her toward the end of the night. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "You've always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. But tonight, you showed us all that it's okay to not always be the strong one. It's okay to ask for help and to put yourself first. I'm sorry for not realizing that sooner." Sarah reached out and took her mother's hand. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was a real one. She wasn't the person she had been before. She had learned to ask for what she needed, to let go of the role she had played for so long, and in doing so, she had found the power to redefine her place in the family. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was the beginning of a new chapter, where each person had the space to grow, to heal, and to be who they truly were. As the night came to a close, Sarah stood on the porch, gazing at the stars above. It was then that she realized this journey, this struggle, had brought her exactly where she needed to be. It had brought her back to her family, but more importantly, it had brought her back to herself. And that, she thought with a small smile, was the most powerful thing of all. The days that followed the family reunion were a whirlwind of emotions, thoughts, and reflections for Sarah. She had entered that evening with a sense of uncertainty, unsure of what would happen. But now, looking back, she could hardly believe the transformation that had occurred. The weight she had carried for so long had lightened, not because everything was fixed, but because there had been a shift, one that was crucial for her own healing, and maybe, just maybe, for her family's too. But while the reunion had marked a turning point, Sarah knew that healing was not an overnight process. She couldn't expect everything to fall into place just because of one conversation. No, the journey was long, and it would require more than just a single family gathering. Rebuilding the bonds that had frayed over the years would take time, effort, and, above all, patience. It wasn't long before Sarah realized that the first step in rebuilding those bonds had to be with herself. The realization came to her one morning as she sat on the porch, the salty sea breeze ruffling her hair. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was caught in the undertow. She was finally learning how to navigate the waves, to take control of her own direction, rather than letting the tides of her family's needs carry her wherever they pleased. She had made progress, but it was only the beginning. The phone call from her brother, James, came later that week. She had expected it in some ways. James had been the most distant during the reunion, and she sensed he was still processing his own feelings about everything. But she was also cautiously optimistic. If there was one person in the family who could understand her need for space and change, it was James. He had always been the one to challenge the status quo, the one who asked hard questions, even when no one else dared. "Hey, sis," James greeted, his voice sounding almost tentative on the other end of the line. "How's everything going?" "Good," Sarah replied. "Really good, actually. It's been a strange few days, but I'm okay. I'm learning to take things one step at a time." "Yeah, I hear you," James said, his voice softer now. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about the reunion, about how we've all treated you over the years." Sarah could hear the sincerity in his voice, and it made her heart swell. This wasn't a conversation she had expected to have with James. He had always been the rebel in the family, the one who found it hard to fit into the mold everyone else had built. But hearing him take responsibility for his part in the family dynamic made Sarah realize that the family was finally starting to see the truth. "I know I haven't been around much," James continued. "And I know that's hurt you. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you'd been holding on to, or how much you were trying to keep everything together. Honestly, I've been selfish, and I'm sorry for that." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. This wasn't the conversation she had imagined having with her brother, but it was the one she had always hoped for. James had never been one to open up easily, and hearing him express his regret was both humbling and healing. "You don't have to apologize, James," she said quietly. "I know you've had your own struggles. But I think what I still need, is for you to see me. Not just as the person who has to fix everything for everyone else, but as someone who has her own feelings, her own life. I needed you to see me as I am, not as the person who holds it all together." There was a pause on the other end, and Sarah could almost hear him processing her words. "I get that," he finally said. "And I'm sorry for not being there for you in the way you needed. But I'm here now, sis. If you ever need me, really need me, I'll be there." No questions asked. Sarah smiled softly, feeling a warmth in her chest. Thanks, James. That means a lot to me. The conversation ended on a hopeful note, but Sarah knew this was only one step in a long journey. Still, it was a beginning, a true, honest beginning. And that was more than she could have asked for, given the state of things just a few months ago. A few days later, Sarah received a surprise visitor. Mark showed up at the beach house unexpectedly, a warm, apologetic smile on his face. "Can I come in?" he asked gently, his voice calm, but with a hint of uncertainty. Of course, Sarah replied, surprised but also grateful. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon after their last conversation, but she also knew that this was part of the healing process, facing the past and acknowledging the complexities of their relationship. Mark stepped inside, looking around at the beach house she had made her sanctuary. The air between them was different now, less tense, more open. "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about everything too," Mark began, sitting down across from her. "And I wanted to say that I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me. I know I didn't understand what you were going through, and I didn't give you the space to be yourself, to really be you." Sarah took a deep breath, absorbing his words. It was hard to look at him and not remember all the years of feeling like she had to carry both her burdens and his. But she also knew that this was part of the process, the part where they both took responsibility for their shortcomings and worked toward healing. "It's okay, Mark," Sarah said softly. "I think we both needed time to figure out who we are outside of our past, outside of what we thought we were supposed to be. I'm not asking for perfection. I just want something real." Mark nodded, his eyes sincere. "I'm ready to be real with you, Sarah. I know I've messed up, but I'm not going to make excuses. I want to try. If you're willing to give me that chance." The weight in Sarah's chest lifted as she looked at Mark. She wasn't sure where their relationship would go, but one thing was clear. They were both ready to move forward, to rebuild, and to finally give each other the space they needed to grow. "Let's take it one day at a time," Sarah said, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. As Mark stood up to leave, he paused for a moment and looked at her with a soft smile. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. I really am." As he walked out, Sarah couldn't help but feel that for the first time, she wasn't carrying the weight of the past alone. She had begun the process of rebuilding, not just her relationships with her family, but with herself. She looked out over the ocean, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting a warm glow across the horizon. It was the beginning of something new, and though the journey ahead would still have its challenges, she finally felt like she was on the right path. The days that followed Mark's visit were quieter than Sarah had anticipated. She had been bracing herself for a whirlwind of emotions, for an onslaught of unresolved feelings bubbling to the surface. But instead, the house by the beach felt almost serene, a stark contrast to the chaotic years she had spent with her family. It was as though the calm of the ocean had seeped into her own soul, soothing the wounds that had been so long ignored. Still, there were moments when the peace felt fragile. There were times when the silence in the house would stretch a little too long, and Sarah would find herself wondering if she was truly making the right choices. Was she ready to open herself up again? Was it really possible to rebuild everything, or was she just fooling herself by believing things could change? Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock at the door one Saturday afternoon. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and for a moment, she considered ignoring it. But something told her to answer. As she opened the door, she found herself face to face with a woman she hadn't seen in years, her aunt, Elaine. "Sarah," Elaine said, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know where else to turn. Can I come in?" Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing. Elaine hadn't been a part of their family's lives for a long time. In fact, Sarah hadn't seen her aunt since the fallout years ago, when Elaine had made a decision that tore their family apart. She had taken sides in a family dispute that was too complicated to explain, and her actions had made things worse, leaving a trail of hurt feelings in her wake. But now, as Sarah stood there staring at the woman who had once been such an integral part of her life, she felt a mixture of surprise, caution, and curiosity. "Of course," Sarah said, stepping aside to let Elaine into the house. "Come in. It's been a long time." Elaine smiled weakly as she stepped inside. She looked older than Sarah remembered, her face lined with the years of regret and hardship. But there was something else in her eyes, a vulnerability, a pleading for understanding. It was clear that the years had not been kind to her. The two women sat down on the couch, and for a few moments, neither of them spoke. Sarah wasn't sure where to start. After all, Elaine had been one of the people who had helped create the distance between Sarah and the rest of the family in the first place. But there was something about the air between them now, a quiet understanding that the past could not be erased, but perhaps it could be acknowledged. "I don't know how to begin," Elaine said, breaking the silence. "I've made so many mistakes, Sarah. I've hurt you, your parents, your siblings, and I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to fix it, and I still don't know how. But I needed to say this to you. I needed to apologize." Sarah felt a pang of emotion in her chest. She had spent so many years resenting Elaine, so many years wishing her aunt had made a different choice. But as she looked at the woman in front of her now, she realized how much of the past was still weighing on her. It wasn't just about what Elaine had done, it was about how much that hurt had festered within her, how much it had shaped her relationships with her own family. "Why now?" Sarah finally asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. "Why after all these years?" Elaine took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "Because I've seen the damage I've done, Sarah. And because I've watched you, the way you've always been the glue that held everything together, the one who took on everyone's pain, and I realized something. I never gave you the chance to have your own life. I never gave you space to heal. I know I can't undo the past, but if I can do one thing right, it's to give you that space now." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. Her heart ached with the weight of everything she had carried, not just from her immediate family, but from the wider circle of relationships that had been affected by years of tension. But somewhere deep inside, Sarah knew that this moment, this conversation, was the beginning of something important. Maybe this was what she had needed all along, not to be the one holding everyone's pieces together, but to be given the room to acknowledge her own hurt and find a way to heal it. "I don't know what to say," Sarah whispered, her voice raw. "But I think I needed to hear that. More than you know." Elaine reached across the couch, her hand shaking as she took Sarah's. "I know it's not enough, Sarah. And I'm not asking for your forgiveness, not yet. But I'm here now. And I'll be here for as long as it takes. I'm ready to be part of your life again, if you'll let me." There was something about the sincerity in Elaine's eyes that made Sarah's defenses slowly crumble. She had built up so many walls over the years, convinced that her family would never change, that the damage was too deep. But now, with this unexpected visit from her aunt, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a realization that the path to healing didn't have to be walked alone. I think we can start small," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with newfound hope. "Maybe we can start with just being honest. And see where it goes from there." Elaine's eyes welled up with tears, and she nodded, squeezing Sarah's hand. "That sounds like the best place to start." The conversation turned to lighter topics, and Sarah found herself surprised by how natural it felt to reconnect with Elaine. It wasn't perfect. There was still a lot of unresolved hurt between them, but there was something that had been broken open, something that made Sarah feel like there was finally a chance for a new chapter, a chance for growth. As Elaine left that afternoon, Sarah stood at the door, watching her aunt disappear down the path. A sense of cautious optimism filled her heart. She wasn't sure what would come next, or how everything would unfold, but she had taken a step towards something she had thought was lost forever: reconciliation. And in that moment, Sarah knew one thing for certain: healing was not a destination, it was a journey. And she was finally ready to take that journey, no matter where it led. The air was cool the next morning, a gentle breeze sweeping across the beach as Sarah took her usual walk along the shore. The meeting with Elaine had left her feeling oddly unsettled, but also hopeful, as if a part of her life that she had closed off for years was slowly opening again. There was so much hurt, so much history to unpack, and yet Sarah couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, the weight she had carried for so long didn't feel quite as heavy. It was early enough that the beach was mostly deserted, save for a few joggers and a couple of seagulls diving for breakfast. Sarah was grateful for the quiet, the solitude. She needed to think. As she walked, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, seeing a text from her brother, James. "James, I was thinking about what you said last time we talked. I want to make it right between us. Maybe we can sit down soon, just the two of us." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected James to reach out so soon, but she was also relieved. They had made a lot of progress at the reunion, but there were still lingering issues between them. As much as she had wanted to move forward, Sarah knew she had to be willing to face everything, the good and the painful. She typed back quickly, her fingers almost eager to respond. "Sarah, I'd like that. When are you free?" A few moments later, James replied. "James, how about tomorrow afternoon? I'll bring coffee." "Sarah, sounds perfect. I'll see you then." As she hit send, a sense of calm washed over her. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. She couldn't keep holding her family at arm's length if she ever wanted to find peace within herself. The next day, Sarah prepared herself mentally for the conversation with James. She had spent so many years angry at him, so many years feeling like he didn't understand her or care about her the way she needed. But over time, she had come to realize that it wasn't just about him. She, too, had been holding onto anger, letting it build up like a dam waiting to burst. And now, she was starting to see that if she wanted healing, she had to let go of that anger, bit by bit. James arrived at the beach house just after 2 p.m., carrying 2 cups of coffee from the local cafe. He had a nervous smile on his face as he walked inside, handing Sarah her coffee. "I wasn't sure what kind of coffee you'd like," he said, a small laugh escaping his lips. "So I just got whatever." Sarah smiled and took the cup. "You know me better than that. I'll drink whatever you bring. I'm just glad you're here." They sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them comfortable but heavy with unspoken words. James stared into his coffee, swirling it absently as if he was trying to figure out how to begin. "I know I've been a mess, Sarah," he said after a long pause, his voice low. "And I know I've hurt you. I guess I've always been kind of a screw-up, but I never meant for you to carry all of this alone. I've just been avoiding it. Avoiding you." Sarah listened, letting his words sink in. For the longest time, she had blamed James for everything from their broken family to her own sense of isolation. But hearing him acknowledge the pain he had caused, hearing the remorse in his voice, shifted something in her. It wasn't all on him. She had her own part to play in their fractured relationship, too. "I didn't want to be the person everyone depended on anymore," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I didn't want to be the one holding everything together while I fell apart inside. I needed someone to notice, James. I needed someone to care." He nodded, his gaze not leaving hers. "I get that. I do. I was too wrapped up in my own stuff to see that you were drowning. I'm sorry." Sarah took a deep breath, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. "I think I always thought I had to fix everything. I thought if I kept everything in control, things would get better. But all it did was build a wall between us. Between me and everyone." James leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "I don't want you to have to fix everything, Sarah. I want to be a part of your life. I want us to be able to talk, to share what's really going on. I don't want you to feel like you're carrying everything alone anymore." For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a sense of relief. She wasn't sure where they would go from here. She didn't know what the future held. But she knew that this conversation, this moment, was a crucial first step toward rebuilding their relationship. "I've missed you," Sarah said quietly, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I've missed having you in my life, even though I didn't know how to make it work. I don't want to keep living like this. I want to have a real relationship with you, even if it's hard." James's expression softened, and for the first time, Sarah saw a glimpse of the brother she had once known, the one who had always been her partner in mischief, the one who had laughed with her through the good times. That part of their bond, the part that had once been so effortless, was still there, buried beneath the years of silence and hurt. "I want that too," he said, his voice steady now, as though a weight had lifted off his shoulders. "Let's take it one step at a time. We don't need to rush things." They spent the next few hours talking, sharing stories, and slowly peeling back the layers of their relationship. There were still things left unsaid, things they needed to work through. But for now, the fact that they were talking, truly talking, was enough. As the afternoon sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah realized something. Healing wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about moving forward, one small step at a time. And right now, she was okay with that. The days following her conversation with James passed in a blur of quiet reflection and hopeful anticipation. Sarah had always been the type of person to overanalyze, to twist every word, every action, until she was dizzy with uncertainty. But with James, there was a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. The walls she had built around herself were beginning to crumble, piece by piece, and with each conversation, each step toward reconnection, she felt lighter. However, Sarah knew that the hardest part was yet to come. As much as her relationship with James had improved, there was still the matter of her parents, particularly her mother, who had always been the linchpin of their complicated family dynamics. They hadn't spoken much since the family reunion, and Sarah felt an unease building in the pit of her stomach every time she thought about it. Her mother, Margaret, had always been a woman of contradictions, loving yet distant, supportive yet emotionally unavailable. Their relationship had always been strained, with Sarah feeling both adored and neglected in equal measure. When Sarah had decided to step away from the family years ago, it had been Margaret's cold indifference that had pushed her over the edge. Now, with the storm of their past still lingering, Sarah was unsure whether her mother would ever be willing to acknowledge the hurt they had caused each other. It was late afternoon when Sarah's phone rang, cutting through the quiet of the house. She saw her mother's name flash across the screen and felt a knot tighten in her chest. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Hello." Sarah's voice was steady, though her heart was racing. "Sarah." Margaret's voice was soft, almost hesitant. I was wondering if we could talk. In person, maybe?" The words hung in the air, charged with the weight of years of unspoken grievances. Sarah hesitated, not sure how to respond. She had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was here, she was uncertain. Would this be another round of defensiveness and blame? Or could they finally bridge the gap that had grown between them? "I think we need to," Sarah finally replied, her voice more certain than she felt. "I'll meet you at the cafe tomorrow around noon." Margaret agreed, and the conversation ended with a promise to see each other soon. Sarah hung up, staring at the phone for a moment before setting it down. A strange mix of emotions flooded her: nervousness, fear, and even a flicker of hope. Could this conversation be the turning point she had been waiting for? The following day, Sarah arrived at the cafe early, choosing a quiet corner where she could sit and collect her thoughts. The air was thick with tension, and she found herself absent-mindedly stirring her coffee as she waited. The sound of the doorbell jingling caught her attention, and she looked up to see her mother walking in, her usual composed demeanor giving away nothing. Margaret looked just as Sarah remembered, elegant, poised, and seemingly unaffected by the years that had passed. She smiled faintly as she approached, her eyes not meeting Sarah's at first. There was an awkwardness between them now, one that hadn't been there before. The kind of unspoken hurt that lingered long after the words had been left unsaid. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice even. "Thanks for meeting me." Margaret nodded and sat down across from her, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "I didn't know how to start this," she said quietly, her gaze finally meeting Sarah's. "I don't even know if I can fix things, but I owe you an apology. I know I haven't been the mother you needed me to be." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The words were exactly what she had longed to hear, but they also felt like a weight lifting from her chest, and the impact was immediate. Her mother had never been the one to admit her faults, at least not in any meaningful way. To hear her say it now, so simply, was both comforting and unsettling. "I never really knew how to show you that I cared," Margaret continued, her voice faltering. "I thought I was doing the right thing by pushing you, by trying to help you be strong. But I see now that I only pushed you away." Sarah stared at her mother, unsure of how to respond. The years of resentment, the moments of feeling neglected, suddenly felt too large to grasp all at once. It was hard to let go of the hurt she had carried for so long, but for the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could finally be honest with each other. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been angry at you for a long time. Angry because I felt like you didn't care. But the truth is, I didn't know how to tell you what I needed. I didn't know how to make you see that I was hurting, too." Margaret's expression softened, and she reached across the table, her hand trembling as it touched Sarah's. "I should have seen that. I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me most." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their words hung in the air, fragile and tentative. They had both spent so many years dancing around the truth, avoiding the confrontation that would have brought them closer. But now, they were finally starting to see each other, not as mother and daughter caught in an endless cycle of expectation, but as two people who had both been wounded and needed healing. "I've missed you, Mom," Sarah whispered, her eyes welling up. "I've missed the way things used to be, before everything got so complicated." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she squeezed Sarah's hand. "I've missed you too. I've been waiting for this moment, hoping that we could find our way back to each other." The next hour passed in a blur of tears, apologies, and quiet laughter. They spoke of the past, of the things that had kept them apart, and of the future, uncertain but full of the possibility of change. There were still many things they needed to work through, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt the hope of something real. Something that could heal the wounds that had kept them apart for so long. When they finally stood up to leave, Sarah's heart felt a little lighter. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was no sudden fix for everything, but it was a step. A big one. And in that moment, Sarah knew that, just like the waves crashing against the shore, the healing would come in cycles. Sometimes it would feel gentle and peaceful, other times it would be turbulent and difficult. But as long as they kept moving forward, there was always hope. The days following Sarah's conversation with her mother were a whirlwind. The beach house, once a haven of calm and isolation, now felt like a gathering place for the family's messy, complicated history. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, Sarah found herself oddly at peace. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't running away from the people she had once loved, and that realization was both freeing and terrifying. The next week, Sarah spent more time at the beach, walking along the shore, reflecting on her life and what had brought her to this point. It wasn't just about healing her relationships with her family, it was about healing herself. Sarah had spent so many years trying to be the strong one, the dependable one, the one who held it all together. But she was beginning to understand that strength wasn't about carrying everything alone. Strength was about being vulnerable, about letting others in and allowing them to carry some of the load with you. It was a concept Sarah was still learning, but each day, she felt a little more confident, a little more willing to open herself up. As she walked along the beach one late afternoon, her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a message from Elaine. Elaine, Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I think it's time to make some changes. I'd love to meet again soon. Can we talk tomorrow? Sarah paused, reading the message again. Elaine was one of the few people in her life who had always been an anchor, a friend who never wavered, even when things between them had been strained. Sarah had been avoiding talking to her about the reunion and everything that had happened, but she knew it was time. Their friendship, too, needed to heal. She typed back quickly. Sarah, of course. I'll see you tomorrow at the usual spot. Let's talk. The next morning, Sarah met Elaine at their favorite coffee shop, the one by the water where they had spent countless hours talking about life, love, and everything in between. It had always been a place of comfort for Sarah, a sanctuary where she could be herself without the weight of expectations. But today, there was an undercurrent of tension. She could feel it in the way Elaine was sitting, tense and fidgeting with her coffee cup, as if she was trying to summon the courage to say something important. Hey, Elaine said when Sarah sat down, her voice hesitant. Thanks for meeting me. Of course, Sarah replied, offering her a soft smile. You've been on my mind a lot lately. Elaine nodded but didn't return the smile. Instead, she looked at Sarah with a kind of vulnerability that made Sarah's heart ache. I've been thinking about how we left things, Elaine began, her voice quiet but clear. And I realized that I never really understood what you were going through. I was so focused on my own feelings, on my own pain, that I didn't see what you needed. And I'm sorry for that. The sincerity in Elaine's words took Sarah by surprise. She had been expecting a more defensive conversation, one where they both tiptoed around the issues that had kept them apart. But this was different. Elaine wasn't just apologizing for what happened at the reunion, she was acknowledging the deeper rift that had formed between them over the years. I know I've been distant, Elaine continued, and I want to make it right. I want to be there for you the way you've always been there for me. But I also know I can't fix everything. I can't undo the past, but I can try to be a better friend. Can you forgive me? The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind swirling with the emotions of the past, with all the hurt and frustration that had built up between them. But as she looked at Elaine, her best friend, the one person who had always been there for her, even when it seemed like no one else was, she felt something shift. It wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about pretending the hurt hadn't happened. It was about choosing to move forward together, despite everything. I forgive you, Elaine, Sarah said, her voice steady. But it's not just about forgiveness. It's about being real with each other, about letting go of the things we've been holding onto. I've been angry at you too. I've been hurt, and I've kept that from you because I didn't want to lose you. But I think we both need to start being honest with each other. Elaine nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't want to lose you either, Sarah. You're one of the most important people in my life, and I've been so scared that I've messed it up beyond repair. Sarah reached across the table and took Elaine's hand. We haven't messed it up, not beyond repair. But we have to be willing to try. We can't just go back to how things were. We have to rebuild slowly. And I'm willing to do that. Are you? Elaine squeezed her hand in return. Yes, I am. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt the burden of the past begin to lift. There was still work to be done, still things they needed to discuss and work through, but in that moment, it felt like a weight had been lifted from her chest. The storm of the past, the anger, the bitterness, it was starting to calm. As the afternoon wore on, they talked about their shared memories, their mistakes, and their hopes for the future. The conversation wasn't easy, but it was real. And that, Sarah realized, was all that mattered. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's the hardest conversation you've ever had to have? Let me know in the comments below. The days after Sarah and Elaine's heart-to-heart were quieter, but in the best possible way. There was a sense of peace that had settled over Sarah, as if a heavy fog had finally cleared. She found herself reflecting on everything that had happened, the reunion, the conflicts, the healing, and it felt as though she was walking into a new chapter of her life. But while the past was beginning to feel like a distant memory, she also knew that the real work was just beginning. The reconciliation with her family, the strengthening of her friendships, none of it would be easy. But Sarah was ready. The next weekend, Sarah decided to host a small gathering at her beach house. She had invited Elaine, James, and a few close friends, people who had been a constant source of support and encouragement. It wasn't a family reunion, but it was a beginning of something new. A new tradition, a new start, and most importantly, a chance for her to surround herself with the people who truly cared about her. Elaine had arrived early to help set up, bringing with her a box of homemade pastries that filled the air with the delicious scent of cinnamon and sugar. The two of them worked side by side, laughing and chatting as they arranged the furniture on the deck and prepared the food for the gathering. "This place looks amazing," Elaine commented as she stepped back to admire their work. "I can't believe you've made it through everything, and yet here you are, hosting a party like nothing ever happened." Sarah smiled, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "I'm still trying to figure out if I'm doing the right thing," she said. "I mean, I've had all this time to reflect, but it still feels like there's so much left to sort out." Elaine paused and turned to her. "You're doing fine, Sarah. You're not supposed to have it all figured out. You've made it through the storm, and now it's time to let the sun shine in again. This," she gestured around the house, "this is your new beginning. And I'm so proud of you." The warmth in Elaine's voice filled Sarah with a deep sense of gratitude. The doubts and fears that had once clouded her path seemed less daunting now. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. She had learned that the journey wasn't always linear, that there were ups and downs, twists and turns, but the key was to keep moving forward. As the evening approached, the first guests began to arrive. James was one of the first to show up, his familiar presence bringing an immediate sense of calm. He smiled warmly at Sarah as he stepped onto the deck, carrying a bottle of wine in one hand and a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. "For you," James said, handing her the flowers. "You deserve all the beauty life has to offer." Sarah's heart fluttered as she accepted the gift, touched by the gesture. It was moments like these that reminded her of how far she had come. The tension that had once existed between them, born from years of misunderstanding and hurt, was finally dissipating, replaced by something far more genuine. A connection built on trust, vulnerability, and respect. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, the words barely escaping her lips. "That means a lot to me." Soon, the deck was filled with laughter and conversation. The air was warm, the ocean breeze carrying the sound of waves crashing gently against the shore. The small gathering felt effortless, as if they had all stepped into this new chapter of Sarah's life without any hesitations or reservations. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned to lighter topics: travel, books, and future plans. Sarah found herself laughing freely, her worries about the past slipping further away with each passing moment. She looked around at the faces of the people she loved, at the people who had stood by her even when it wasn't easy, and she realized just how much love and support she had in her life. But then, as the night drew to a close, there was a knock on the door. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone else. Hesitantly, she opened the door, and there stood her mother, Margaret. Sarah's stomach tightened, and she froze for a moment. The woman who had once been a source of so much pain and confusion was now standing in front of her, looking vulnerable and uncertain. Margaret took a step forward, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and hope. "Sarah," she said, her voice trembling, "I know I'm the last person you expected to show up, but I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. I'm sorry for everything, and I want to be a part of your life again if you'll let me. Sarah stood there, taken aback. Her emotions surged: confusion, anger, relief. But instead of retreating, as she would have done in the past, Sarah felt a wave of empathy wash over her. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The chance to open her heart again. "Mom," Sarah said softly, her voice unsteady. "You're here. And that means more to me than anything else." Margaret stepped inside, her presence filling the space with a new kind of energy. There was still much to say, many years of hurt to work through, but in that moment, Sarah realized that this was the beginning of something new. A new kind of family, one that wasn't defined by past mistakes or misunderstandings, but by a willingness to grow, to forgive, and to love again. The group gathered around, exchanging warm greetings and shared smiles, but Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over her as the night continued. The love that had once seemed so distant was now within reach. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The warmth of the evening lingered long after the last guest had left. Sarah stood on the deck, staring out at the horizon where the moonlight kissed the water, casting a silvery glow over the ocean. She could still feel the residual energy of the night, the laughter, the conversations, the unexpected reunion with her mother. It was as if the weight of everything she had been carrying for years was slowly being lifted, piece by piece. But even as she embraced the peacefulness of the moment, Sarah knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. Margaret's arrival had been unexpected, but in a way, it had felt like the missing piece. The last thread in a tapestry that was finally starting to make sense. Their conversation earlier that evening had been uncomfortable, but there had been a raw honesty between them that Sarah hadn't expected. Margaret had admitted her mistakes, her regrets, and most importantly, her desire to reconnect with her daughter. It had been a humbling moment for Sarah. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many things left unsaid, but she knew this was the beginning of a new chapter. One where healing was possible, not just for her, but for the entire family. The sound of the door creaking behind her snapped Sarah out of her reverie. She turned to find Elaine standing there, a soft smile on her face. "Hey," Elaine said, stepping outside with a glass of wine in her hand. "I figured you could use some company." Sarah smiled and motioned for her to join her at the railing. "You have no idea," she said, accepting the glass. "Tonight has been a lot, but also good, you know." Elaine nodded, leaning against the railing next to Sarah. The two of them stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sound the distant crashing of waves. "It's been a long road, hasn't it?" Elaine said, breaking the silence. "But I think you're finally getting to a place where you can move forward, Sarah." Sarah's gaze drifted toward the water. "I hope so. It's strange to feel like things are starting to fall into place. But then it also feels like there's so much more to unpack. So much more to heal." Elaine took a sip of her wine and gave her friend a knowing look. "You've been carrying this weight for so long, and it's not just about what happened with your mom or the family. It's about everything. The expectations, the mistakes, the parts of you that you've kept hidden. But you're doing it, Sarah. You're letting go. You're healing." The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had been so focused on the external relationships, the reunion with her family, the mending of broken ties, that she hadn't truly taken the time to consider her own internal healing. It wasn't just about forgiving others, it was about forgiving herself. About allowing herself to let go of the guilt, the shame, and the resentment that had kept her anchored in the past. "I've been so afraid of letting myself feel everything," Sarah admitted quietly, her voice raw with emotion. "I didn't want to face it all, the hurt and the disappointment. I thought if I just kept moving forward, I could outrun it. But I can't, and I don't know how to start." Elaine placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering silent support. "You're already starting, Sarah. Every step you take, every conversation you have, it's all part of the process. You're already stronger than you think. Sarah turned to face her friend, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow in her eyes. I'm scared, Elaine. I'm scared that I'm going to let people down. That even if I forgive them, I won't be able to rebuild what we've lost. Or worse, that I won't be able to rebuild myself. Elaine's expression softened, and she met Sarah's gaze with unwavering sincerity. You don't have to rebuild alone, Sarah. You've got a whole team of people who love you, who want to see you succeed. And that includes your mom. She's here. She showed up tonight. At the mention of her mother, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was still hard to wrap her mind around the idea of actually opening up to Margaret, of giving her a chance to prove that she had changed. But for the first time, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about progress. About trying, even when the past was full of mistakes. You're right, Sarah said, her voice quieter now. She showed up. And that's a start, isn't it? Elaine gave a small nod. It's a big start. Sometimes, showing up is all it takes to begin the healing process. As the night wore on, Sarah and Elaine continued to talk, but there was a sense of lightness in their conversation that hadn't been there before. It was as if the weight of the past had started to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of possibility. The following week, Sarah invited her mother over for a one-on-one dinner at the beach house. The thought of it made Sarah anxious, but she knew it was a step she needed to take. She wasn't expecting everything to be resolved in one night, but she hoped that it would be a meaningful conversation, one that would lay the foundation for a new relationship between them. Margaret arrived just as the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the beach. She looked different, softer, less guarded than before. Her eyes were filled with emotion as she stepped into the house, and Sarah felt a rush of nervousness mixed with hope. Hi, Sarah said, her voice tentative. It's good to see you. Margaret smiled, but it was a little shaky. Thank you for inviting me, Sarah. I know I haven't been the mother you needed, and I don't expect anything from you. I just want to be here, to listen and maybe start over. Sarah swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. I want that too, she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. But it's going to take time, Mom. And we have to be patient with each other. With ourselves. Margaret nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she could breathe. She didn't know what the future held, but she was beginning to understand that healing was a journey. It would take time. It would take effort. But it was a journey worth taking. The days following Sarah's dinner with her mother were filled with a mixture of reflection and anticipation. They had barely scratched the surface in terms of addressing the years of pain between them, but there was something undeniably different in the air now. For the first time in a long time, there was a sense of potential, an unspoken acknowledgement that despite everything, they were both ready to try again. The next time Margaret came over, it was on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Sarah had invited her to spend the day at the beach house, where they could talk more freely, without the pressures of time or obligations hanging over them. This time, there would be no dinner and no formalities. It was just the two of them, a rare opportunity to find some peace in the midst of everything they had been through. Margaret arrived with a basket of fruit and snacks, as if to offer something light and uncomplicated. She smiled nervously as she stepped through the door, clearly unsure of what to expect, but Sarah's open, warm smile reassured her. Hey, I thought we could just hang out today, Sarah said casually, gesturing to the expansive deck that overlooked the beach. There's no agenda, no pressure. Just us. Margaret's eyes softened, and she nodded. I like that idea. I think we both need that. They spent the next few hours in comfortable silence, sipping iced tea and watching the waves crash against the shore. The kind of day where words weren't necessary. They could simply exist in the same space, sharing a moment of peace. But eventually, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Margaret turned to Sarah with a quiet, almost apologetic expression. "Sarah," she said softly, "I need to ask something. And I hope you don't think I'm pushing you, but how do we move forward from here?" Sarah took a deep breath, her heart racing at the thought of answering such a loaded question. She had wondered the same thing for weeks now, but for some reason, hearing her mother ask it aloud felt like a pivotal moment. It was a crossroads, an opportunity for clarity, and, perhaps, a glimpse of the future. "I don't know the exact answer, Mom," Sarah admitted, her voice steady but filled with the uncertainty she felt inside. "I think moving forward means accepting that it's not going to be easy. We've got years of pain to sort through. But it also means forgiving. And I think we both need to do that." Margaret's eyes welled up with tears. "I've asked for forgiveness so many times, but I never truly understood the depth of what I did. I hurt you, Sarah. I hurt you in ways I'll never be able to undo, and I'm so sorry for that." Sarah reached over and took her mother's hand in hers, feeling a mix of emotions rush through her. There was sadness, yes, but there was also something else, a sense of relief, like finally exhaling after holding your breath for years. "I know you're sorry, Mom," Sarah said quietly. "And I've carried that pain for so long, I didn't know if I could ever let it go. But the truth is, I don't want to live in that pain anymore. I want to move forward with you. I don't want the past to hold me back." Margaret nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and hope. "I don't expect us to forget what happened. But I hope we can rebuild what we had, even if it's different. Even if it's a new version of us." For a moment, there was only the sound of the ocean and the gentle breeze as they sat there, holding hands. Sarah realized that Margaret was right. The relationship they had once had would never be the same. But maybe that was okay. Sometimes, the most meaningful relationships are the ones that are rebuilt from the ground up. "I think that's exactly what we need," Sarah replied, her voice filled with resolve. "A new version of us." A few days later, Sarah invited her extended family over for a small gathering. This wasn't a grand affair, just a few close relatives, those who had been supportive through the hardest parts of her journey. Her Aunt Karen, her cousin Sam, and a few others. It was an opportunity for Sarah to begin rebuilding the familial ties that had been severed for so long. There was no grand apology waiting to be made, no dramatic confrontation. This time, it was just about being together, about laying the groundwork for something new. As her family arrived, Sarah couldn't help but feel a flutter of nerves. She hadn't seen some of them in years, and although they had all been part of the family reunion drama, she was hopeful that this gathering could be different. That they could find a way to put the past behind them and focus on the present. "Sarah, it's so good to see you," Karen said, enveloping her in a warm hug. "This place looks amazing." Sarah smiled, feeling the weight of her nerves slowly lift. "Thank you, Aunt Karen. It's good to have you here." The rest of the family mingled, and for the first time in what felt like ages, the air felt light. People laughed, caught up on each other's lives, and Sarah found herself smiling, enjoying the ease of the moment. There was no tension, no underlying resentment, just a shared desire to reconnect, to move forward. As the night wore on, Sarah couldn't help but look around at the faces of the people she had once thought she would never be able to share a space with again. And yet, here they were, all together. Her mother was sitting next to her cousin Sam, laughing about something that had happened years ago, and Sarah realized that she had not imagined this moment. It was real. She had made it happen. The evening ended with everyone gathered on the beach, watching the sun set together. It was a peaceful moment, one that seemed to symbolize the healing that had taken place. Sarah stood beside her mother, both of them gazing out at the horizon, a silent understanding between them. They weren't there yet, but they were getting closer. It had been a few weeks since Sarah had begun to rebuild relationships that once seemed irreparable. The dinner with her mother, the family gathering at the beach house, everything had felt like a fresh start. But despite the positive steps forward, there was an underlying unease she couldn't shake. It wasn't about the people around her, or even the progress they'd made. It was the internal battle that raged inside of her. The fear, the doubt, the difficulty of truly letting go. Even when things seemed calm, Sarah found herself questioning whether she was truly ready to move on. Could she really forgive her mother? Could she trust that the changes Margaret was making were real? And what about herself? Could she forgive herself for the years of resentment, for holding onto bitterness for so long? It was a rainy Thursday morning when Sarah found herself standing at the window of the beach house, looking out at the gray sky and the waves crashing relentlessly against the shore. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside of her, chaotic, unpredictable, and overwhelming. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a text from Elaine. "Elaine, how's everything going? I know it's been a lot lately, but I'm here if you need to talk." Sarah stared at the message for a few moments before typing her response. "Sarah, I'm struggling, Elaine. I thought I was ready to forgive. I thought I was ready to move forward, but I'm not sure I am." She hit send and immediately regretted it. She didn't want to burden her friend with her confusion. She was supposed to have it all figured out by now, right? She had done the work, she had taken the steps to open herself up to healing, to reconnect with her family, but it was clear that some wounds were deeper than she had realized. The phone buzzed again, pulling her from her spiral of self-doubt. "Elaine, it's okay to not have it all figured out. Trust me, we're all a work in progress. Want to grab lunch later? We can talk through this, or we can just hang out and eat something good. No pressure." Sarah smiled slightly, grateful for Elaine's unwavering support. She had always been a safe space for Sarah, a constant reminder that it was okay to feel uncertain and messy sometimes. With a sigh, Sarah typed back, "Sarah, lunch sounds good. I need a break from my own head." Later that afternoon, Sarah met Elaine at a small cafe by the beach. The familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee and the soft hum of conversations made Sarah feel momentarily at ease. She spotted Elaine at a corner booth and walked over, giving her friend a tight hug before sitting down. "Hey, thanks for meeting me," Sarah said, immediately feeling the weight lift from her shoulders just by being in Elaine's presence. "Of course. I'm always here for you," Elaine replied, giving her a reassuring smile. "Now, what's going on? You've been quiet lately." Sarah took a deep breath, letting the calmness of the cafe settle her thoughts. "I don't know. I thought I was doing better. I thought I had all the right tools to heal, to forgive, to move forward. But every time I start to believe it's possible, I get scared. I don't know if I'm ready to truly forgive my mom, or even myself." Elaine listened intently, her expression understanding. "Forgiveness is hard, Sarah. It's not a one-time thing, you know? It's not like you just wake up one day and say, okay, I forgive you. It's a process. And it's okay to have doubts. You don't have to rush it." Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I know. I keep thinking that maybe if I forgive her, I'm going to open myself up to being hurt again. Maybe I'm afraid of letting myself down. Afraid that if I let my guard down, things will go back to how they were. And then I'll be hurt all over again." Elaine took a sip of her coffee, contemplating Sarah's words. "But you've already made the decision to move forward. You invited your mom to your house. You spent time with her. Those are big steps. You're not going to be the same person you were before, and neither will she. You're both learning and growing, and it's okay to take your time with that. There's no rush." Sarah smiled faintly. "I just want to get it right. I want to believe that the past can be left behind. But the doubts creep in. The what-ifs. What if I'm making a mistake by letting her back in? What if I'm setting myself up for more disappointment?" Elaine leaned across the table, her eyes serious. "What if you're not? What if this is your chance to heal? What if forgiving doesn't mean forgetting? It just means you're letting go of the hold the past has on you. You're not making yourself vulnerable to hurt again. You're making yourself open to growth. And that's what you deserve." You deserve peace, Sarah. For a moment, Sarah sat quietly, absorbing Elaine's words. She wanted to believe them, wanted to believe that opening her heart again, both to her mother and to herself, was the right thing to do. But deep down, a part of her still wasn't sure if she was capable of fully letting go. I want to believe that, Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But I don't know how. I've carried this pain for so long. It's hard to imagine life without it. Elaine reached across the table, placing her hand gently on Sarah's. You've been carrying it, yes. But you don't have to anymore. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It just means you're choosing to move forward, even if it's hard. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all, the hurt, the confusion, and the overwhelming desire to heal. She wanted so badly to believe that forgiveness was possible, that she could move forward without carrying the past on her back. I don't know if I'm ready yet, she whispered, more to herself than to Elaine. But maybe I'm getting there. Elaine gave her a soft, understanding smile. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. One step at a time. And I'll be here every step of the way. As Sarah left the cafe, the sky was beginning to clear, the clouds breaking apart to reveal the faintest hint of sunlight. She felt lighter than she had in days, a small but significant shift in her heart. She wasn't ready to forgive everything yet, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the path toward it. The storm inside her was still there, but the clouds were starting to part. The following week, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. She had been making progress in her emotional journey, but the fear that had clung to her for so long was still there, lurking in the background. Every moment of progress felt like a fragile victory, and she was terrified of ruining it. Could she really let go of the years of pain, or was she just fooling herself? To her surprise, it wasn't the conversations with her mother that triggered her most profound realizations. It was a conversation with her cousin, Sam. It had been a few months since their relationship had shifted after Sarah's family reunion debacle. Sam had always been a big part of her life growing up, but he distanced himself for reasons Sarah hadn't quite understood. Still, he was one of the few people from her extended family who had kept in touch consistently, checking in on her, sending texts, and calling when he felt it was time to catch up. One afternoon, Sam called her unexpectedly. It was a crisp fall day, and the soft orange light from the setting sun had started to spill into the beach house, making the whole room feel warm and peaceful. Hey, Sarah. How's everything going? Sam's voice on the other end of the line was relaxed, but there was a tinge of concern in it. Hey, Sam. Things are, they're going. Slowly, but I'm getting there, Sarah replied, still unsure how to phrase her own emotional state. You don't have to be all fine, you know? I'm not expecting some big, happy ending right away. But I've been thinking about you. I know things have been messy with the family, and I know you've been trying to figure out what you want moving forward. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Sam had always been someone who could see through her facade, someone who understood her better than most. Yeah, it's exactly it, Sarah said, her voice shaky. I've been trying to make sense of everything, and I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive, or if I'll ever truly be able to. It feels like I'm stuck between two versions of myself, the one who's trying to heal, and the one who's still angry. Sam was silent for a beat, and Sarah could almost hear him processing her words. You know, Sam finally said, his tone thoughtful, I don't have all the answers, but I do know this. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's not about your mom or anyone else. It's about you. The thing I've learned, especially after everything with the family, is that forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for them. It's not about excusing their behavior or forgetting what they did. It's about you taking control of your own peace. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to absorb his words. I don't know how to let go of the resentment, though. It feels like if I forgive, it'll just be like letting it all slide. Like it doesn't matter what they did. That's the thing, Sam replied gently. Forgiving doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean what happened doesn't matter. It just means you're not carrying it around anymore. You're not giving it power over you. You get to choose what kind of life you want to live, and holding on to that anger, holding on to the past, just drags you down. It doesn't change anything about what happened. But it can change you. It can change how you move forward, how you live your life. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt the weight on her chest lighten, just a little. Sam's words resonated deep within her. She had been so focused on the idea of letting go for others, her mother, her family, even the people who had hurt her, that she hadn't fully realized that forgiveness was a gift she was giving herself. It was a chance to heal, a chance to stop letting the past control her future. I don't know, Sam, she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. It's hard. I don't want to open myself up to getting hurt again. Neither do I, Sam admitted. But I think you have to trust that you're stronger now. You're not the same person you were before. And, honestly, I think the hardest part of all this for me was accepting that I couldn't fix everyone else. I couldn't fix my relationship with Aunt Margaret or with the family. All I could do was focus on myself, on my own healing. And I think that's what you're doing, too. You're learning to be at peace with where you're at, even if it means setting boundaries with people who don't understand that peace yet. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. Sam always had a way of cutting to the heart of the matter, of saying exactly what she needed to hear without any sugarcoating. I guess I've been so focused on what others might think, what they might expect from me, that I forgot it's okay to take things at my own pace. It's okay if it takes time, Sarah said, her voice steadying. Exactly, Sam said with a note of pride in his voice. You don't have to rush your healing. It's not a race. Just take it one step at a time. And remember, I'm here. I've got your back. Sarah smiled softly. Thanks, Sam. That means a lot to me. Anytime. And hey, whenever you're ready, you know I'm always down for a beach day to talk things through, or just to be quiet together. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a shift within herself. Sam's words had given her the clarity she needed, and for the first time in a long while, she felt less burdened. It was okay to move forward at her own pace. It was okay to acknowledge the pain, but also to release it, bit by bit, when she was ready. Later that evening, Sarah sat on the deck of her beach house, looking out at the horizon. The waves were gentle that night, a soft lullaby against the backdrop of the darkening sky. It was a quiet moment, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to truly breathe. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew that she was beginning to find her way through it. She thought about her mother, about the difficult conversations they'd had, and about the journey they still had ahead of them. But tonight, the weight of that uncertainty felt a little lighter. The soft breeze from the ocean swept through the open windows of Sarah's beach house as she sat by her desk, contemplating the steps ahead. The conversation with Sam had opened up a new understanding of forgiveness and healing, but the truth was that Sarah still didn't feel entirely at peace. There was a lingering question in the back of her mind. How could she let go of something that had shaped her for so long? She had tried, at least in her heart, to forgive. She had opened her door to her family and extended olive branches, but the scars from the past were not easy to ignore. It was like they were tattooed on her soul, invisible to the eye but deeply imprinted in her every thought, every moment of hesitation. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from her mother. Margaret. Hi, Sarah, I was thinking about you today. Are you free to talk soon? Sarah stared at the message for a few moments, her fingers hovering over the screen. She wasn't sure if she was ready for another conversation with her mother. Sure, they had made progress during the family reunion, and she had seen small glimmers of change in her mother's behavior, but the emotional baggage was still there. Every conversation felt like a potential minefield, with old wounds threatening to reopen at any moment. But she knew that avoiding it would not make things better. She had to face her past, or it would continue to control her future. Sarah, I'm free this evening. Let's talk then. She hit send, setting the phone down with a deep breath. The decision had been made. It was time to confront the past, one more time, for the sake of healing. As the evening approached, Sarah prepared herself mentally. She wasn't sure what this conversation would hold, but she knew it was necessary. When the call came, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Her mother's voice on the other end was warmer than she expected, but Sarah still felt a twinge of caution. "Hi, sweetie. How are you?" Margaret's voice was soft, almost tentative. "I'm okay, Mom," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I wanted to talk to you." There was a pause on the other end, and then her mother spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've made so many mistakes, Sarah. I've hurt you in ways that I can't take back. But I need you to know that I've been working on myself. I've been talking to a therapist, and I'm trying to understand what went wrong. I know that doesn't change the past, but I want you to know that I'm trying." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her mother's words. She had heard similar things before, promises, apologies, but this time felt different. There was a sincerity in her voice that Sarah hadn't heard in years. "I know you're trying, Mom," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's hard for me to just let go of everything. The pain from the past still feels so fresh, and it's hard to believe that things can truly be different." "I understand, Sarah." "I do," Margaret said softly. "And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I just wanted you to know that I'm not the same person I was before. I've been learning. And I hope that, in time, you can see that." The conversation lingered in the air, thick with emotion. Sarah wasn't sure what to say next. Part of her wanted to believe her mother's words. Part of her wanted to keep her distance and protect herself from further hurt. But another part of her, the part that had been slowly healing, wanted to take a leap of faith. It was time for a new beginning, one where forgiveness wasn't just about letting go, but about choosing to move forward despite the fear. "I'm not ready to forget everything, Mom," Sarah said, her voice raw. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes, even if it's hard." Margaret's voice broke slightly. "That's all I can ask for, sweetie. I just want a chance to make things right." The conversation ended with a promise to continue their dialogue, but for Sarah, it felt like a significant shift. She wasn't holding onto the anger anymore. She wasn't ready to jump in with both feet, but she was opening herself up to the possibility that her mother could change, and that she, too, could heal. As the days passed, Sarah found herself taking small but meaningful steps toward rebuilding trust with her mother. They didn't dive into deep emotional conversations every day, but they began to talk more frequently. They shared memories from Sarah's childhood, laughed at the silly things that had happened over the years, and occasionally touched on the difficult moments. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And even though Sarah wasn't sure what the future would hold, there was a glimmer of hope that she hadn't felt before. She was learning that healing wasn't a straight line, and it wasn't about rushing to forget. It was about taking it one day at a time, allowing herself to feel what she needed to feel, and choosing to move forward, even when it was hard. One evening, after a particularly long day, Sarah sat down with her journal, pen in hand. It had become a safe place for her, a place where she could process her emotions without judgment. As she began to write, she reflected on the journey she had been on, how far she had come, and how much more she still had to go. Healing isn't a destination. It's a process. And I'm still learning how to take it slow. But I'm not giving up. Not on myself. Not on Mom. And not on us. She closed the journal, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't have all the answers, and there were still days when the weight of the past felt unbearable. But she was beginning to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about choosing to live fully, in spite of it. As she closed her eyes that night, Sarah whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the strength she had found in herself. And, for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful not just for the future, but for the person she was becoming. The next few weeks passed with a sense of tentative progress. Sarah had taken Sam's advice to heart, allowing herself the space to heal and face the past on her own terms. Her conversations with her mother had continued, and while they weren't without their challenges, something had begun to shift. It was slow, painfully slow, but there was a flicker of hope that Sarah hadn't allowed herself to see before. She hadn't expected that hope to come in the form of a family dinner invitation. It was a Friday evening when Sarah received the message from her cousin, Claire, who had always been one of the few people in her family who understood her. Their bond had been strong during childhood, but as the years had passed and family dynamics shifted, they drifted apart, only sporadically catching up during major holidays. Claire's message came as a surprise. "Claire, hey Sarah, I know things have been rough lately, and I've been thinking about you. The family's having a dinner this Saturday night. It won't be the whole crew, just close family. I'd love it if you came. I know it might feel a bit weird, but I think it's time for us to reconnect." Sarah stared at the message, feeling a mix of emotions. She hadn't expected an invitation like this, not after the fallout from the family reunion. Would this be another painful reminder of how fractured everything had become? Or was it an opportunity to start fresh? She thought back to her conversation with Sam about how healing wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was about learning to step forward, even when it felt uncertain. Maybe this dinner was a chance to rebuild something broken, a chance to test the waters before jumping fully back in. "Sarah, thanks, Claire. I'll come. Let's see how it goes." The day of the dinner, Sarah found herself pacing nervously around her beach house. She had been in this position before, dressed up, heart racing, preparing for a reunion that could go one of two ways. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was because she wasn't going and expecting perfection, or maybe it was because she had learned that healing didn't require everyone to get it right the first time. The dinner was set to be casual, a family gathering at Claire's house with a small group of relatives. No big speeches, no grand expectations. Just food, conversation, and hopefully some understanding. Sarah drove to Claire's house, the familiar route bringing a flood of memories, both good and bad. When she arrived, the house was warm and inviting, the smell of roasted chicken and vegetables filling the air. She took a deep breath before stepping inside. As she walked through the door, she was met with Claire's welcoming smile, which made her feel a little lighter. "Hey, you made it," Claire greeted, pulling Sarah into a hug. "I'm so glad you came. I know it's been a while, but we've missed you." Sarah smiled, trying to push aside the nervousness that crept in. "Thanks for inviting me, Claire. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I'm glad to be here." Claire led her into the living room, where a few other family members were already gathered. Sarah felt her heart rate quicken as she spotted her mother standing by the window, chatting with Aunt Helen. Margaret glanced up and met Sarah's eyes. There was no awkwardness in her gaze, just a quiet understanding. She smiled gently. "Sarah," Margaret said, her voice softer than it had been in their past interactions. "I'm glad you could make it. I was hoping we could catch up a bit more tonight." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. It was the first time in a long while that her mother had spoken to her in such a calm, sincere way. The urge to retreat, to hold on to her anger, flared up for a split second, but she quickly suppressed it. This wasn't the moment for old wounds. It was a chance to try again. "I'd like that," Sarah said, her voice steady. They moved to the dinner table, where the meal was laid out in front of them. The atmosphere was comfortable, the conversation light. It was a stark contrast to the tension Sarah had anticipated. As they ate, they shared stories from the past year, laughed about old family memories, and talked about their lives, both the good and the bad. There were moments when Sarah caught herself slipping into old habits, avoiding certain topics, or being hyper-aware of her surroundings. but she reminded herself to breathe. This was not about pretending everything was fine. This was about finding a way to be in the same room together without the weight of unresolved issues suffocating them. After dinner, as the dishes were being cleared, Sarah found herself alone on the porch with her mother. The others were inside, catching up, but it was just the two of them, under the quiet sky. "Can we talk?" Margaret asked, her voice soft. Sarah hesitated but nodded, unsure of what to expect. "I've been thinking about what we talked about before," Margaret began. "And I know I have a long way to go. I'm not perfect, and I don't expect you to forgive me just because I've asked. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for everything, for not being the mother you needed, for not listening when it mattered most. I'm sorry for all the hurt I've caused." Her voice cracked slightly, and Sarah could see the vulnerability in her mother's eyes. It was the first time she had seen her mother speak so openly, so without the defensiveness she'd often carried in the past. "I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to forgive everything," Sarah said, the words coming out slowly. "But I do appreciate you saying that. And I think, for the first time in a long time, I'm ready to start rebuilding, not just for us, but for me, too. I've spent too long holding onto the anger. I don't want it to control me anymore." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I just want to be a better mother. And if that means taking it slow, then I'll wait as long as it takes." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had never imagined this moment, but here it was, a raw, genuine exchange that held the potential for something different. Something real. "You don't have to wait, Mom," Sarah said, her voice steady but soft. "We can take it one step at a time." The two of them stood there in silence, the quiet night stretching around them. There were no guarantees, no promises of instant change, but in that moment, Sarah felt something shift. A weight lifted, even if just a little. Healing, she realized, was like the ocean. Sometimes it came in waves, gentle and slow, but always moving forward. The weeks following the dinner at Claire's house felt like they had unlocked a door Sarah hadn't even realized was there. It wasn't an instant transformation, but there was a lightness in the air. Something had shifted between Sarah and her mother, and despite the heavy history between them, there was hope. There were small, quiet conversations that didn't carry the weight of past mistakes. They were learning to coexist in the present, without dragging everything from the past into every interaction. It was a strange feeling, like being caught between the past and the future, trying to balance the two. The memories of hurt still lingered, but they no longer controlled her every thought. Sarah realized she wasn't just forgiving her mother, she was forgiving herself for holding onto the anger for so long. And it felt freeing. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah found herself sitting outside her beach house, watching the waves crash gently on the shore. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an amber glow over everything. She had always loved moments like this, when everything seemed to slow down and the world felt just right. But today, there was a new thought on her mind. It had been months since the family reunion debacle, and Sarah couldn't help but wonder about her future. About what this new dynamic meant for her relationships with her family, and, more importantly, what it meant for her own personal growth. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from Claire. "Claire, hey, I've been thinking. There's a beach cleanup event this weekend. Want to join me? It might be a nice way to get out and do something good, and who knows, maybe we can talk more about the family stuff. I know you've been through a lot, and I think this might be a good way to ease back into things. What do you think?" Sarah read the message several times. A beach cleanup event. It sounded simple enough, but Claire's underlying message was clear. This wasn't just about cleaning the beach. It was about reconnecting, doing something together, and perhaps even tackling some of the difficult conversations that still loomed in the background. "Sarah, I'm in. I think it's a great idea. I'll meet you there." As the weekend approached, Sarah's nerves began to build again. She wasn't sure what kind of conversations would arise, or if she was ready to dive back into the complicated waters of her family relationships. But she reminded herself of what she had learned over the last few months. Healing wasn't linear, and progress didn't come with a set timetable. She wasn't looking for perfection, she was looking for growth. The beach cleanup event was bustling with energy when Sarah arrived. Volunteers of all ages had gathered with bags, gloves, and a shared sense of purpose. Claire was already there, organizing a group of people as they picked up trash along the shoreline. As Sarah approached, Claire waved her over. "Hey, glad you could make it?" Claire grinned. "It's good to see you outside of the usual family drama." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thanks for inviting me. I could definitely use a little fresh air." They joined a small group of volunteers, walking along the beach and filling bags with plastic bottles, wrappers, and other debris. The rhythmic sound of the waves, mixed with the chatter of the group, helped Sarah relax, and as she worked, her mind began to wander. She thought about her own journey, how she had spent so many years just surviving, just getting through the tough moments. But now she realized she was actually living. She was taking the time to breathe, to heal, and to grow. As the day wore on, Sarah found herself feeling more connected to the present moment, to the people around her, and, strangely enough, to her own emotions. There was something therapeutic about the simple act of picking up trash and making the world a little bit cleaner. It felt like a metaphor for what she had been doing in her own life, slowly, one step at a time, clearing out the emotional clutter that had built up over the years. After a few hours, the event began to wind down. Volunteers gathered around a fire pit set up near the edge of the beach, where refreshments and snacks were available. Sarah joined Claire by the fire, feeling the warmth of the flames and the cool ocean breeze mixing together. It was a moment of quiet reflection, and Sarah couldn't help but think about how much her perspective had changed in just a few months. "I'm really proud of you, Sarah," Claire said, breaking the silence. "You've come a long way. I know it's been tough, but you've been so strong." Sarah looked over at her cousin, her throat tight with emotion. "I've been trying. I think I'm finally starting to see things a little more clearly. I don't have all the answers and I'm still figuring things out, but I'm not carrying around all that anger anymore." Claire nodded, her expression soft. "That's huge. Letting go of all that negativity. It's the first step toward true healing. I think you're finally getting there." Sarah felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from the release, the kind of release she hadn't felt in years. It was as though the weight she'd been carrying was starting to lighten. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive everything, but I do think I'm ready to move forward," Sarah said quietly. "I can't change the past, but I can control how I handle the future." "That's the key, isn't it?" Claire said softly, her voice full of understanding. "Not forgetting, but choosing to live in a way that honors what you've learned." "I'm proud of you, Sarah." Sarah smiled, her heart full. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was carrying the past with her. She was still processing it, still learning from it, but she wasn't trapped by it. As the evening wound down and the fire burned low, Sarah realized that she was standing at the edge of something new, something unfamiliar but full of possibility. She wasn't defined by her past mistakes, nor by the hurt others had caused her. She was ready to write her own story, one step at a time. It had been nearly 4 months since the family reunion, the one she hadn't been invited to, the one that had started this whole storm of change. And Sarah finally felt like she was no longer reacting to it. She was responding to life on her own terms now. She wasn't living for the next apology. She wasn't waiting for someone to suddenly get it. She was setting boundaries, real ones. Not the kind drawn in sand and easily washed away by guilt or nostalgia, but solid lines built from self-respect. Still, setting boundaries when it came to family was messy. One afternoon, while sipping her coffee and watching the waves roll in, Sarah's phone rang. It was her Aunt Diane, a woman known for sugarcoating things and avoiding anything remotely resembling emotional discomfort. "Hi, Aunt Diane," Sarah answered, cautiously polite. "Hey, sweetheart. So, your mom told me things have been better lately between you two. I'm glad to hear that. Listen, your cousin Nathan's wedding is next month, and everyone's hoping you'll come." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. There it is, she thought. The unspoken test. The real measure of whether she was over it. "I appreciate the invite," she said, "but I'm not sure if I'm ready to step back into that dynamic, at least, not in that setting." Diane let out a familiar sigh. "I understand, honey, but maybe this could be a good next step. A way to let bygones be bygones." There it was, let bygones be bygones. That phrase made Sarah's skin crawl. It always translated to, "We're uncomfortable with your pain. Can you just pretend it didn't happen?" "I don't think ignoring the past is the same as moving forward," Sarah said firmly. "This isn't about holding a grudge. It's about protecting my peace." There was a pause on the other end. "I see," Diane replied, slower now. "Well, you do what you need to do. Just know you'll be missed." Sarah thanked her and hung up, the tension settling like dust around her shoulders. Later that evening, she called Sam. "I feel like the healthier I get, the harder it is to navigate people who are still stuck in denial," Sarah said, curled up on her couch. "That's because you're not playing the same game anymore," Sam said. "You've stopped hoping for validation from people who never understood the rules." Sarah let that sink in. "I just wish I didn't feel so guilty when I say no. Even when I know it's the right call. That guilt? That's not yours. It's theirs. They want you to carry it because it makes them more comfortable. You get to put it down." Sarah exhaled. "You always know what to say." "I'm just repeating what you already know," Sam replied. "You're not doing this for revenge or drama. You're doing it for healing. And healing is messy. Especially when you're the first one to do it in a family that avoids emotions like they're contagious." That line made Sarah laugh out loud. But it was true. The more she prioritized her well-being, the more resistance she felt, not because she was doing anything wrong, but because she was disrupting a system that relied on silence. The following week, Sarah invited her mother to lunch, her idea. That was new. They sat at a little cafe overlooking the ocean, the kind of place Sarah loved for its peace and simplicity. Margaret arrived a few minutes late, but for once, didn't offer an excuse. She just smiled and hugged her daughter. "You look relaxed," Margaret said. "I am, mostly," Sarah admitted. "But I wanted to talk to you about something." Her mother's posture stiffened, just slightly. Sarah noticed it, but didn't flinch. "I appreciate the effort you've been making," Sarah said. "I really do. But part of that effort means respecting the boundaries I'm putting in place." When Aunt Diane called me about Nathan's wedding, it felt like the old dynamic again, pressure to move on before I'm ready. Margaret nodded slowly. She meant well. "I know. But meaning well doesn't mean it's what's best for me. And I need you to back me up when things like that happen. Not encourage them." Margaret looked down at her cup. "You're right. I didn't think about how that might feel like pressure." "I'm sorry." Sarah studied her mother's face. There was discomfort there, but not defensiveness. That was new. "I'm not asking for perfection," Sarah said gently. "Just space, time, honesty." Margaret looked up. "And I'm willing to give you that. But you're going to have to keep reminding me, okay? I'm learning, but I still slip." "That's fair," Sarah said. "We're both figuring it out." Later that night, Sarah sat on her back porch watching the sunset bleed into the sea. Her journal sat open in her lap, and she began to write. "Today I told the truth without apologizing for it. I didn't explain it away. I didn't soften it to make someone else more comfortable. I just spoke it, and it was okay. Maybe healing isn't just about letting go. Maybe it's about building a life where you don't have to lose yourself to be loved." The sky turned violet and gold, and Sarah felt something settle inside her. She wasn't done healing. Not even close. But she wasn't afraid of the process anymore. There was a quiet stillness in the morning air, the kind that made Sarah pause on her porch steps with her coffee and just listen. The ocean was steady, waves rolling in and out, a rhythm she'd come to mirror in her own life. She had learned to let things come, let things go. And today, more than ever, she felt like she was finally in rhythm with herself. The message came mid-morning. It wasn't dramatic or emotionally charged. Just a simple text from her brother. Matt, hey, I've been thinking a lot. Mind if I stop by the beach house this weekend? Just to talk. Sarah sat back in her chair. She hadn't heard from Matt directly since the fallout, not really. He'd been civil during the family dinner, but distant. He hadn't apologized, hadn't addressed how he'd left her out of the reunion, and he definitely hadn't reached out on his own until now. It would have been easy to ignore the text, to protect her peace and say, not now. But Sarah wasn't afraid anymore, not of discomfort, not of awkward conversations, not of rejection. She had built herself up too far to crumble just because someone else was late to the table. She replied, Sarah, sure. Come by Saturday morning. When Saturday came, Matt pulled into the driveway like a man unsure of his welcome. Sarah opened the door before he knocked. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. Her expression was neutral, a blank page, waiting. Matt stood there for a moment, shifting on his feet like a teenager. Hey, come in, Sarah said simply. They walked out onto the deck, where the ocean provided a steady, grounding soundtrack. Sarah let the silence stretch. If he had something to say, he'd have to earn the space to say it. Finally, he did. I messed up, Matt began, eyes on the horizon. Back at the reunion. I didn't fight for you. I didn't even speak up. I just let it happen. And that's not okay. Sarah's breath caught for just a second. It wasn't the words. It was hearing them from him. Hearing him own his silence. I think, he went on, part of me thought I was staying neutral. Not picking sides. But looking back, I realized that by not standing with you, I stood against you. And that haunts me. He looked at her then, eyes rimmed with guilt. I'm sorry, Sarah. You didn't deserve that. And you didn't deserve to be shut out just because people didn't know how to deal with their own feelings. Sarah nodded slowly, letting the apology settle into her bones. It was real. Not perfect, but real. Thank you, she said softly. It means something to hear that. You know, for a long time, I kept asking myself what I did wrong. Why it was so easy for you all to forget me. But I've stopped doing that. I stopped trying to earn back love that should have been mine all along. Matt swallowed. I know. I don't expect you to trust me again overnight. I just wanted to start. You did, she said. This is a start. After he left, Sarah sat on the deck, her heart heavy but full. Closure, she realized, wasn't always a dramatic moment. Sometimes, it was a quiet conversation that finally named what had gone unnamed. It was choosing peace, not just with others, but with yourself. That evening, Sarah found herself walking the shoreline as the sun dipped into the sea. She felt grounded, more than she had in years. So much had changed. So much still would. But she was no longer waiting for her family to validate her healing. She wasn't living in the ache of exclusion. She had built something stronger than resentment, boundaries, self-respect, and freedom. As she reached the end of the beach, she pulled out her phone and opened a new note. I am not the version of me they ignored. I am not the hurt I had to survive. I am the version of me who came back stronger. And now, they can ask to stay. But I don't owe them the key. The next morning, she sent a message to her therapist. Sarah, I had a real conversation with Matt yesterday. He apologized. Like, genuinely. I didn't expect it, but I didn't let it define me either. I think I've turned a corner. The reply came shortly after. Therapist, beautiful progress. Remember, healing isn't just about what they do, it's about how you live now. And it sounds like you're finally living for you. Sarah looked around her beach house, The home she had once poured her pain into. It was still hers. Still quiet. Still a refuge. But now it no longer felt like a place she was hiding in. It felt like a foundation. Her future. One she had built, brick by honest brick. She walked to the window and looked out at the water. Somewhere out there, her family was continuing to live their lives. Maybe some of them were changing. Maybe some never would. But she wasn't waiting anymore. She had stopped begging to be seen. She saw herself now, and that was enough. It started with a knock on the door. A real one this time. Not a text. Not a phone call. Just a knock, hesitant, but deliberate. Sarah had been expecting it for days. Ever since her conversation with Matt, she had a feeling the others would follow. Not because they'd changed, some hadn't. But because word spreads in families, and suddenly, everyone wants a seat at the table they once refused to set. She opened the door slowly, already knowing who it would be. Her mother. Her aunt. Her sister, Jenna, who hadn't spoken to her since the family reunion. All of them, standing there with that same tentative look. The look people wear when they need something but aren't sure they deserve it. "Hi," Margaret said softly. "We were in the area, and we were hoping to talk. Maybe stay for a bit, if that's okay." Sarah didn't move. She looked at each of them carefully, not out of spite, but out of clarity. This was her house. Her space. Her peace. She had every right to say no. But instead, she stepped aside. "You can come in," she said. "But let's be clear, this isn't the same version of me you left behind." They sat in the living room, quiet at first. The kind of silence that stretches tight across the room. Jenna was the first to speak. "I should have said something," she said. "At the reunion. I knew it was wrong that you weren't there. I didn't want to make things worse." Sarah nodded. "You didn't want to make waves. I get it. But by avoiding conflict, you joined the silence. That hurt worse than any fight ever could." Jenna's eyes brimmed with tears. "I know. And I've thought about it every day since." Her aunt chimed in next. "When Matt told us he came to see you, I realized we've all expected you to keep reaching out, even after we shut you out. That wasn't fair. We've treated your strength like it meant you didn't need support." Margaret nodded slowly. "I've watched you grow into someone I don't even fully recognize. And that's a good thing. You've done what I never had the courage to do, put yourself first. And I'm proud of you for that. Truly." Sarah looked around the room. These weren't enemies. These were flawed, scared, complicated people, just like her. But the difference now was that she had learned how to love herself even when others didn't know how. "I'm not angry anymore," Sarah said. "I've spent enough time inside that fire. But I'm not rushing back into old patterns either. If we're going to rebuild, it's going to take time. Trust. And respect." "We understand," Margaret said. "We'll do the work." Sarah believed her. Maybe not completely, but enough. Later that night, after they'd left, grateful, quieter than when they'd arrived, Sarah stood out on her back deck, barefoot, wine glass in hand, waves crashing in the distance. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who begged for invitations, the one who believed love had to be earned. She wasn't that girl anymore. Her phone buzzed on the deck rail. "Sam, so? Did they come crawling back like we both predicted?" "Sarah, they did. And I let them in. But I didn't let them undo me." "Sam, that's my girl." Sarah smiled, sipping her wine. She walked back into her beach house, her sanctuary, her story, and locked the door behind her. Not to shut people out, but to remind herself, this is sacred space now. She'd built it with pain, with clarity, with healing. Not everyone got a key. Not everyone deserved one. But some people could come in if they knocked. We don't always get the closure we think we want. Sometimes, the real power comes not from being invited back in, but from deciding who gets to stay. Sarah was never just the girl they forgot to invite. She was the woman who learned to open the door on her own terms. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. If you've ever reclaimed your peace after being shut out, tell us your story. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't payback, it's peace.